702.
The Big Interview
With Bongani Bingwa.
19 minutes after 7 o'clock. What if I told you that the air you are breathing right now might be killing you slowly, and there's no warning? A new Greenpeace Africa and CREA report just dropped a bombshell. 42,000 South Africans died from air pollution in 2023 alone, including over 1,000 children. It costs a staggering 960 billion rand to the economy, more than 14% of our GDP. And most of the toxic air is coming from coal-fired power plants in Mpumalanga and Gauteng. But instead of clamping down, those in authority keep giving the big polluters a free pass. It's a crisis of lungs, livelihoods, and leadership. Professor Rajen Naidoo joins us now and, of course, is the expert in occupational and environmental health from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. A very good morning to you and welcome to our program.
Good morning to you, Bongani, and to your listeners. Thank you very much for inviting me.
42,000 deaths in a single year. I mean, that's more than what? Murder, the road accidents, and even HIV-related deaths together. How did we get here?
Absolutely. So those are staggering figures. The important thing is exactly what you mentioned in your introduction. This is an invisible killer. Because it's not in our face, like road accidents around Christmas time, around Easter time, we then tend to ignore it. And to the extent that those people that with the power, such as government and the major polluters, can get away with it.
The report mentions PM 2.5. What exactly is that, and how dangerous is it to average citizens?
So, its PM is particulate matter. A particulate, as we all know, very tiny particles, so small that it cannot be seen with the naked eye. These are tiny enough to be inhaled and travel all the way down into your lungs to the point at which we normally have gas exchange where our oxygen enters into our body. These particles are small enough to cross that barrier into the blood system and get transported throughout our bodies. And because it's a foreign particle, it then triggers off a whole range of reactions in most parts of our bodies. So we've seen, although we're speaking here about the extreme, which is death, we've seen the effects of particulate matter with lung problems, with heart problems. We've seen it with even brain problems. So there's been abundance of information that has shown that children start to develop neurocognitive. In other words, their brain ability starts to be reduced with exposures to these sorts of agents. Even
children in their mother's wombs are not immune?
Absolutely. So we've done for the last 10 years a study looking at air pollution and effects on pregnant females and followed these up with their children. The first effect that we see is that there is an abnormal pregnancy. In other words, children are born low birth weight, prematurely, etc. We then follow those children up as they grow older, and we know that because they've grown low birth weight, they're going to start to have other problems in later life. And those other problems, because they're living in the same communities that the mothers did, then are compounded by these effects of air pollution.
And the high felt, Gauteng specifically, and Mpumalanga hardest hit.
Sorry, Bongani, your question there?
I said Gauteng and Mpumalanga seem to be hardest hit.
Absolutely. So this is, it's clear that the highest levels of air pollution are going to be around our coal-fired power stations. So it's your Wall Triangle priority areas, your high felt priority areas. Now, the fact that these are in areas which are already designated by our legislation as priority air pollution areas is an indicator that government and the stakeholders are aware that these are problematic areas.
But so is something being done?
Well, we have, I wouldn't say the best because our air standards are not as in keeping with the World Health Organization, but even those standards that we have, as this report indicates, in most instances are not being met.
So what's being done about it? That's the question.
Well, it falls upon, remember, the people that are most affected are completely voiceless and marginalized. So it falls upon the civil society, and we've seen this in the past, where organizations as the Center for Environmental Rights takes either government or the polluters to court. And this is obviously a very expensive and laborious process. It takes years before you get a court ruling and before you get action. And in some instances, even when you do get a court ruling, it's not an immediate response from the polluters. So it's always an ongoing challenge, and to a large extent, those most affected are always on the losing end.
And so, I mean, what can people do? Do we just continue to breathe this, knowing we don't have the pockets to take on the polluters in the way that you've just described? I mean, surely government ought to be on our side. Surely there should be some kind of minimum standard to be met and the levels that you've described reversed.
So we do have minimum standards. As I said, we have minimum emission standards. In other words, what are the stuff that's coming out from the stacks that we see in all of these polluting environments? And we also have minimum air quality standards. In other words, if I take a sampler and place it in a community, what is their air pollution level at that? So we have those standards. The air quality standards that we have are not in tandem with the World Health Organization, and one can understand that. So the role of government is to provide a balance between the effects of air pollution and the consequences from an economic point of view. And you know, in many instances, government is meant to play that sort of refereeing or management role.
Yeah.
The problem is that you have two stakeholders, that is those communities that are affected and those stakeholders who are the polluters, with completely different power. So
Yeah. It
the
seems
balance of power is, you expect government to bring about a balance of power, but because these polluters tend to be the big economic drivers in the country, they are the ones that tend to benefit from the unequal situation.
Yeah, people over profits, I suppose, is what it ultimately boils down to. Appreciate your time, Professor Rajen Naidoo, Head of Occupational and Environmental Health at UKZN.
Current events, developing stories,
Tough questions.
your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.